This all started back when I was 15, and my little brother Jensen was 10. Our mom had married Edward about 2 years before. He had 3 kids from his previous marriage, 2 girls and a boy, all younger than us. From day one, Edward made it clear that we weren't his priority. Whatever, fine. We didn't need another dad. Our real dad died when I was 8, and Jensen barely remembered him. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. Edward had been weird about food for months, constantly commenting on how much we ate. He'd literally count the pieces of chicken on our plates or measure cereal into our bowls. Mom never said anything when he did this shit. She just sat there with that tight smile she'd developed since marrying him. The day it all went down started normal. We were walking home from school together like always. I picked Jensen up from elementary before heading home. It was a Thursday in April. I remember because we had a math test the next day that I never ended up taking. As we got closer to the house, I noticed black smoke coming from the backyard. I thought maybe Edward was grilling or something, but it was way too much smoke. We ran the last block, and as we turned into our driveway, I could hear shouting from the backyard. We dropped our backpacks and ran around the side of the house. That's when I saw it. There was a bonfire in the middle of the yard. But it wasn't wood burning. It was our stuff. Our clothes, books, Jensen's stuffed animals, my sports gear, everything. Edward was standing there with a gas can pouring more fuel on the fire. Mom was filming the whole thing with her phone, laughing like this was some kind of funny home video. Edward's kids were watching from the sliding glass door, pointing and laughing. Honestly, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Jensen started crying immediately. I just stood there like an idiot trying to make sense of it. Edward noticed us first. He smiled. Not a normal smile, but like he was enjoying this. He said something about how we ate like grown men, but contributed nothing. Called us parasites. Said they couldn't afford to feed us anymore. Then Mom, my own mother, turned the camera on us and announced they were moving to France tomorrow without us. She had this weird, cheerful voice like she was telling us about a fun surprise, not abandoning her own kids. Jensen was sobbing, asking where we would sleep. Mom just shrugged and said it wasn't her problem after today. Edward pointed down the street and told us foster care was 3 blocks away and we should start walking. The neighbors' kids were in their yard recording everything on their phones. I remember feeling so humiliated on top of everything else. I stood there watching Jensen's bike melt in the fire after Edward threw more gasoline on it, saying his real kids needed the garage space. That's when something in me snapped. Not in a rage way, in a cold, clear way. I grabbed Jensen's hand and just said, "Remember everything, every word." Then we walked away. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew we couldn't stay there. We walked to the park first. Jensen couldn't stop crying. I let him cry while I tried to figure out what to do. We had no money, no phone, no change of clothes, nothing. After about an hour, I decided to try my Uncle Roman. He was my dad's brother and lived about 30 minutes away by bus. We hadn't seen him much since Dad died. Mom always said he was a bad influence because he drank too much and couldn't hold down a job. We had to sneak onto the bus because we had no money for fare. Jensen was still in shock, barely talking. We got to Uncle Roman's apartment complex around 7 p.m. I wasn't even sure which apartment was his, so we had to check the names on all the buzzers. When we found him, he didn't answer at first. We kept buzzing until finally his girlfriend, Violet, came down. She didn't recognize us at first. It had been that long. When I explained who we were, she looked uncomfortable, but let us up. Uncle Roman was half drunk when we got to his apartment. He was surprised to see us, but not exactly happy about it. I had to explain what happened 3 times before he seemed to understand. At first, he thought we were making it up or exaggerating. He called Mom, but she didn't answer. Then he tried Edward, who actually picked up. I could hear Edward's voice through the phone saying we were lying, that we'd run away because we didn't want to do chores, and that they were done dealing with us. Then he hung up. Uncle Roman looked at us like he didn't know what to do with us. He and Violet had this whispered argument in the kitchen while we sat on their couch. I could tell they didn't want us there, but what choice did they have? Finally, Roman came back and said we could stay for a few days until he figured something out. They didn't have a guest room, so we had to sleep on the floor in the living room. That night, Jensen kept waking up crying. I'd never felt so helpless. I promised him I'd take care of him, but honestly, I had no idea how. We were just kids. The next morning, Uncle Roman drove us back to the house to see if it was true about them leaving. The house was empty. They were actually gone. Their cars, their stuff, everything. They'd even changed the locks. Through the windows, we could see the house was half empty. They'd taken what they wanted and left the rest. We went next door to talk to the neighbors, the ones whose kids had been recording. The mom, Lauren, looked horrified when we told her what happened. She confirmed they'd left early that morning in a taxi, all 5 of them with a bunch of suitcases. She showed us the video her kids had taken of the bonfire. It was all true. They'd really abandoned us. Lauren gave us some of their old clothes and made us breakfast while Roman talked to her husband. They were discussing calling social services. Begged them not to. I was terrified of being separated from Jensen. After a lot of arguing, Uncle Roman reluctantly agreed to let us stay with him temporarily. He made it clear he wasn't prepared to be a parent, but he also couldn't let his brother's kids go into the system. That night, back at Roman's apartment, I found Jensen looking at the few family photos we had saved on his old iPad that he'd left at a friend's house the day before. Thank God for that. There was one of all of us before Dad died. Mom looked like a different person then. I asked Jensen if he understood why Mom did this to us. He was only 10, but sometimes kids understand more than we give them credit for. He said Edward told her she had to choose us or them, and she chose them. Later, I found out from Lauren that Edward had been planning this for months. He'd gotten a job offer in France and decided it was the perfect opportunity to start fresh. Apparently, he'd always resented having to support another man's children. The food comments, the constant criticism, it was all leading to this. He'd convinced Mom that they'd have a better life without us holding them back. That first week at Uncle Roman's was the hardest. He had no idea how to take care of kids. Violet tried to help, but it was clear she wasn't thrilled about the situation either. They fought a lot, usually about money and about us. I missed school for a week before Roman finally enrolled us in new schools near his apartment. I had to pretend everything was normal, but nothing would ever be normal again. At night, when Jensen was asleep, I'd replay everything in my head. The fire, the laughing, the casual way they threw us away like we were nothing. I swore that someday, when they least expected it, we would make them remember this day too. I didn't know how yet, but I promised myself that no matter how long it took, they would pay for what they did. And 10 years later, we finally got our chance. Jensen's phone was suddenly flooded with over 50 messages from Mom. Walls of text, voice notes, missed calls. After a decade of silence, she suddenly needed something from us. And that's when our revenge plans started to take shape. I'll post an update tomorrow with what happened in the years between and how we began planning our revenge. This is already getting too long. And honestly, typing all this out is bringing back a lot of shit I thought I'd processed. But trust me, what we did to them was worth the wait. Didn't expect so many people to care about what happened to me and Jensen. Some of you asked for more details about the years between being abandoned and our revenge. So, here goes. Living with Uncle Roman was rough. What started as a few days turned into weeks, then months. The temporary arrangement became our new normal. But Roman never let us forget we were a burden. The apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom where Roman and Violet shared the bedroom while Jensen and I slept in the living room. No privacy, no space, and definitely no feeling of home. About 2 months in, Roman lost his job. Again, he blamed us, saying the stress of suddenly having 2 kids to feed made him mess up at work. That night, I heard him and Violet fighting in their bedroom. She was saying she never signed up to raise someone else's kids and that maybe they should call social services after all. I stayed up all night terrified they'd split us up. The next morning, I skipped school and went to every place in the area with a help wanted sign. Most places laughed at a 15-year-old asking for work. But this small convenience store owner finally agreed to let me stock shelves after school for cash under the table. Wasn't much, but it was something. When I got home that evening, Roman was drunk on the couch. He looked at me and said something I'll never forget. We're just like our dad. A burden on everyone around us. Apparently, my dad had borrowed money from Roman years ago and never paid it back before he died. That's why Roman resented us so much. We reminded him of his brother's failures. I started working every day after school and weekends. I'd give most of the money to Roman for rent and save a little when I could. Jensen would do his homework alone at the store while I worked. The owner felt bad for us and would sometimes give Jensen free snacks. School became secondary. My grades tanked. I went from honor roll to barely passing. Teachers called, but Roman never answered. I forged his signature on report cards. Nobody really noticed or cared that we were basically raising ourselves. Meanwhile, Violet got more and more frustrated with the situation. She and Roman fought constantly, usually about money or about us taking up space. 6 months after we moved in, she gave Roman an ultimatum. Us or her. He chose her. I came home from work to find our stuff, what little we had, piled by the door. Roman was sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle, not even looking at us. He said Violet was moving out unless we left, and he couldn't afford the apartment without her. He gave us 3 days to figure something out. I was 16 by then. Jensen was 11. I seriously considered just getting us a tent and living in the park. But then something unexpected happened. The next day, Violet came home early while Roman was out. She sat us down and actually apologized. She said she felt terrible about the ultimatum, but was desperate because Roman had been drinking more, working less, and their relationship was falling apart. She didn't really want to kick out 2 kids. Instead, she suggested something crazy. Her sister Autumn had a finished basement she wasn't using. It wasn't fancy, but it had a separate entrance and a small bathroom. Violet had already talked to her, and Autumn was willing to let us stay there if I helped with yard work and maintenance. So we moved again. Autumn was cool but kept her distance. She made it clear this wasn't adoption, just helping out kids in a bad situation. Her basement was cold and kind of damp, but it was still better than Roman's couch or foster care. We lived there through the rest of high school. I kept working at the convenience store and added a weekend job mowing lawns in the summer and shoveling snow in winter. Between school and 2 jobs, I was exhausted all the time. But what choice did I have? Jensen had it rough too. Kids at school found out we lived in someone's basement and started bullying him. He got into fights defending himself. I taught him how to throw a proper punch after the 3rd time he came home with a bloody nose. The next kid who tried to mess with him ended up with a broken nose. And Jensen got suspended for a week. I wasn't even mad. I was proud of him for standing up for himself. Throughout all this, we never heard a single word from Mom. Not a call, text, email, nothing, like we never existed. But we had one connection to that side of the family. Mom's cousin Avery, who occasionally checked on us. She wasn't close with Mom, but felt bad about what happened. About once a year, she'd visit and give us updates. That's how we learned that the perfect French life wasn't so perfect after all. Apparently, Edward's job fell through after just 6 months. They struggled financially and eventually moved back to the States after about 2 years, not to our old town, but to a city about 3 hours away. Avery also told us Mom had another baby with Edward, a boy. So, she abandoned her first 2 sons and then had another one. That really fucked with Jensen's head. I graduated high school with barely passing grades. No college prospects, no money for it anyway. Jensen was 15 by then and working part-time, too. I got a better job at a warehouse, making decent money for the first time. We saved enough to rent our own shitty apartment. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I pushed Jensen hard about school. Told him he needed to do better than me. He actually listened. He was always smarter anyway. He studied his ass off and got a partial scholarship to state college. I worked overtime to help cover the rest. He wanted to be a doctor of all things. Ambitious kid. Life went on. I moved up at the warehouse to a supervisor position. Jensen was thriving in college, majoring in biology on the pre-med track. We didn't talk about Mom or Edward much anymore. It was like they existed in some parallel universe that occasionally brushed against ours through Avery's updates. Then last month, everything changed. It was a normal Tuesday. I was at work when Jensen called me, which was weird because he never calls during the day when he knows I'm working. When I answered, he was breathing heavy like he'd been running. He told me to check my email right away. I did, and there was a screenshot of a text conversation. It took me a minute to understand what I was seeing. It was Mom. After 10 fucking years of silence, she'd reached out to Jensen. Not to apologize, not to reconnect. She needed something. Her message started with, "I know it's been a long time." Like she'd just been busy for a decade. Then she explained that her son, her real son, as Edward would say, was sick. He had some kind of kidney disease and needed a transplant. She and Edward weren't matches. Their daughters weren't either. She was contacting Jensen to see if he would get tested as a potential donor for a half-brother he'd never even met. The fucking audacity of this woman. She throws us away like trash, then comes crawling back when she needs a spare part for her favorite kid. Jensen was in shock. I was livid, but also something else. I realized this was it. The opportunity we'd been waiting for. They needed something from us. They were vulnerable. The perfect time to make them remember what they did. I called Jensen and told him not to respond yet. We needed to think this through. Use this to our advantage. He agreed. That night, we met at my apartment and stayed up until 4 a.m. planning. We looked up everything we could find about them online. Edward had started some business that seemed to be doing well. They lived in a nice house in a good neighborhood. Mom didn't work. She was a full-time mom to her real family. They looked happy in their social media photos, like we never existed. Our plan started small, but grew as we talked. We weren't just going to say no to the kidney request. We were going to make them pay for what they did. Make them remember the day they burned our things and told us to walk to foster care. Make them feel a fraction of the pain and fear we felt. Jensen, who's normally the calm, rational one, surprised me with how on board he was. He said, "They left us with nothing. Let's see how they like having everything taken away." The first step was information gathering. We needed to know more about their lives, their business, their weaknesses. Jensen suggested reaching out to Lauren, our old neighbor. She might still have that video of them burning our stuff. That would be valuable leverage. I took time off work and drove to our old neighborhood the next day. Lauren still lived there, though her kids were grown and gone. She remembered us immediately and invited me in. I explained why I was there, and she was shocked to hear about the kidney request. She dug through her old files and found the video. 10 years old, but still clear enough. The sound of my mom laughing while our stuff burned made me sick all over again. The next part of our plan involved Edward's business. Through some digging online, I discovered he was looking to expand, seeking new commercial space. This is where my warehouse experience would come in handy. I had connections in commercial real estate from my work managing logistics. As for Jensen, he would respond to Mom, not to say yes, but to keep her on the hook, make her think there was a chance he might help, get more information. We needed to know everything about their lives before we made our move. We also found out through Avery that our step-siblings were now teenagers, the oldest about to start college. Perfect timing for financial pressure. The plan was coming together. We wouldn't do anything illegal. We wouldn't sink to their level of cruelty, but we would make them face consequences for what they did. We would show them exactly what it feels like to have everything you count on suddenly disappear. Last week, we put the first part of our plan in motion. Jensen finally responded to Mom's messages asking for more information about the situation. She immediately called him crying about how grateful she was that he was even considering helping. She didn't even ask how we'd survived all these years. Not one question about our lives. During that call, Jensen got her to reveal that she hadn't told Edward she was contacting us. Interesting. Apparently, he still referred to us as those parasites and would be furious if he knew she was reaching out. She was acting behind his back out of desperation for her precious son. So, that's where we are now. The pieces are in place. The trap is set. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with Edward about a perfect commercial property for his business expansion. He has no idea who I am. I'm using my middle name, and we haven't seen each other in a decade. Jensen is scheduled to meet Mom at a cafe to discuss the kidney situation. After 10 years of rebuilding our lives from nothing, we're finally ready to tear theirs down. Not through violence or anything illegal, but by using the very things they value, money, reputation, family loyalty, against them. I'll update again after tomorrow's meetings. This is just the beginning. Okay, so a lot has happened since my last update. The plan is in motion and things are moving fast. I'm typing this at 2 a.m. because I can't sleep with all the adrenaline still pumping through my system. First, my meeting with Edward. I wore a button-up shirt and slacks. Not my usual style, but I needed to look the part. I kept thinking he might recognize me, but 10 years is a long time, and I look different now. More filled out, different haircut, some stubble. Plus, he never really paid attention to me when I was a kid. Anyway, I met him at this overpriced coffee place he suggested. He was exactly how I remembered. Smug, fake smile, expensive watch he kept checking. He was taller than I remembered, though. Weird how your mind shrinks the monsters from your childhood. I introduced myself using my middle name, James. Told him I worked with commercial properties and heard he was looking to expand. The whole time I was sitting there thinking about how this man poured gasoline on my little brother's bike and told us to walk to foster care. And he had no idea who I was. I showed him pictures of this property I'd found through a warehouse contact. It looked perfect on paper. Right location, right size, decent price. What he didn't know was that the building had serious structural issues that would cost a fortune to fix. The current owner was desperate to unload it before the problems became obvious. Edward was practically salivating over the photos. Kept talking about how this was exactly what he needed for his business expansion. I suggested he should act fast before someone else snatched it up. The whole limited time offer shit. He fell for it completely. The best part, I dropped in casual conversation about how the owner was going through a divorce and needed a quick sale, so Edward might be able to get it even cheaper if he moved quickly. His eyes literally lit up at the prospect of taking advantage of someone's misfortune. Some people never change. Meanwhile, Jensen was meeting with Mom at a cafe across town. We synced our timing on our phones so our meetings would happen simultaneously. His job was to keep Mom distracted so she wouldn't contact Edward while I was with him. After my meeting, I parked near the cafe and waited for Jensen. When he came out, he looked shaken. I hadn't seen him that upset in years. We drove back to my apartment in silence. When we got there, he finally told me what happened. Mom had shown up with pictures of her precious sick son. Kept shoving them in Jensen's face, saying how he could save his brother's life. Jensen said she didn't even ask how his life had been for 10 years until he pointedly mentioned it. Then she gave some half-assed, "I'm sorry it had to be that way," non-apology. The kicker, she admitted Edward still didn't know she was talking to Jensen. She was afraid he'd be furious if he found out she was reaching out to the parasites. Yes, she actually said he still calls us that. She made Jensen promise not to tell Edward about their meeting. Perfect for our plan. Jensen told her he'd think about the kidney testing, but needed more information about the medical situation. She was so desperate, she immediately forwarded him all the medical records. This woman, who couldn't be bothered to send a single text for 10 years, was now blowing up his phone every few hours with updates and emotional manipulation. 2 days later, Edward called me, well, James, to say he wanted to move forward with the property. I connected him with the seller, actually another warehouse guy who owed me a favor, and stepped back to watch the train wreck happen. Edward signed a lease agreement without even getting a proper inspection. The seller had created a contract that made it nearly impossible for Edward to back out once he discovered the problems. He was so excited about the deal he was getting that he didn't read the fine print. The deposit alone was 5 figures. While that was happening, Jensen was stringing Mom along about the kidney. He told her he'd need to meet his half-brother first before making any decisions. She was hesitant, but so desperate she agreed. She invited him to their house for dinner the following weekend, still insisting that Edward couldn't know who Jensen really was. The plan was coming together better than we expected. But then something unexpected happened. One night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. It was one of Edward's daughters, Autumn. Apparently, she'd found Jensen on Instagram after her mom had been acting weird and secretive. She'd overheard enough to piece together what was happening with her brother needing a kidney. She was calling to warn us that her dad was on the verge of a breakdown over his business problems and that her brother was sicker than their mom was letting on. This was interesting. Autumn remembered us. She'd been about 7 when we were kicked out. She said she'd had nightmares for years about the day they burned our stuff. She and her siblings had been told by Edward that we were dangerous and that's why we had to leave immediately. They'd been scared of us. The whole thing had been twisted to make us the villains. I didn't know what to do with this information at first. Part of me wanted to tell her to fuck off. She'd been pointing and laughing while our stuff burned. But she was just a kid then, manipulated by her father. Still, I wasn't about to forgive and forget. I asked why she was calling now. She said she'd always felt guilty. And when she realized her mom was trying to get a kidney from the brothers they'd abandoned, something in her snapped. She wanted no part of it. She also mentioned that Edward's business was already struggling before the expansion, which explained his desperation to find a new space. Our plan was working even better than we thought. Jensen and I had a long talk about what to do with this new information. We decided to use it. Jensen would go to the dinner as planned, but now we knew more about the family dynamics we could exploit. The dinner was yesterday and holy shit was it a shit show. Jensen went wearing a hidden audio recorder, completely legal in our state as long as one party consents to the recording. Mom introduced him to everyone as an old family friend's son who was in pre-med and interested in kidney donation. Edward was suspicious but distracted by his business problems. Their son, the one needing the kidney, was clearly very sick, 16 years old and looked about 12, pale and thin. Jensen said it was hard not to feel bad for the kid, who had no idea who Jensen really was. The other kids, now teenagers, kept giving Jensen weird looks throughout dinner. About halfway through the meal, Edward got a call. I could hear Jensen trying not to laugh on the recording as Edward stepped outside to take it. It was the seller of the property informing Edward that an inspection had found black mold throughout the building. And per their agreement, Edward was still responsible for the remediation costs. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars on top of the money he'd already put down. Edward came back inside fuming, started taking it out on everyone at the table. Jensen said he was shouting about how everything was falling apart and nobody appreciated how hard he worked for this family. Then, in the middle of his rant, he looked at Jensen and froze. Jensen said it was like watching someone see a ghost. Edward stared at him and said he looked familiar. Asked if they'd met before. This wasn't part of the plan. Jensen had to think fast. He said maybe Edward was thinking of his older brother who looked similar. Edward asked what his brother's name was and Jensen, the absolute madman, said Bryce. Edward's face went white. He started putting it together. Asked Jensen what his name was. When Jensen told him, Edward flipped the entire dining table, food, dishes, everything went flying. He started screaming that Mom had invited one of the parasites into their home. The sick kid was confused and scared. The other kids were trying to calm their dad down. Mom was crying, saying she didn't have a choice, that their son needed a kidney, and Jensen might be a match. That's when Edward realized the full situation. His wife had gone behind his back to contact the kids they'd abandoned for a kidney for their son. He completely lost it, started screaming at Mom about betraying him, endangering their family by bringing that person into their home. Jensen said the sick kid was just staring at him with this heartbreaking, confused look, like he couldn't understand what was happening or why his dad was calling the stranger a parasite. Edward grabbed Jensen by the shirt and tried to physically throw him out of the house. Jensen, who's actually pretty fit from working out at the campus gym, easily broke Edward's grip and shoved him back. Told him to never touch him again. Said that unlike Edward, he wasn't in the habit of abusing kids. Mom was begging them both to stop. The other kids were recording everything on their phones. Ironically, similar to the day our stuff was burned. Jensen calmly told Edward that he was only there because his mother had begged him to consider helping his half-brother and that Edward should be thanking him for even considering it after what they did to us. Edward asked what Jensen was talking about. Jensen reminded him about the day they burned our belongings and told us to walk to foster care. Edward claimed that never happened, that we were dangerous and they had to leave suddenly for the family's safety. Mom started crying harder. Jensen pulled out his phone and played the video Lauren had given us. The one showing them burning our stuff, laughing, calling us parasites. The one where Mom clearly says they're going to France without us. The one where Edward tells us to walk to foster care. The entire family went silent watching it. The sick kids started crying. The older kids looked horrified. Edward lunged for Jensen's phone, but Jensen moved back and said he had multiple copies. Then Edward threatened to sue Jensen for recording him without consent. Jensen calmly informed him about our state's one-party consent law for recordings. Said the bigger legal issue might be child abandonment, which has no statute of limitations in our state. Edward ordered Jensen to leave. As he was walking out, Mom ran after him, still begging about the kidney. Jensen told her he'd be in touch, but that she needed to understand there would be conditions if he decided to help. So, that's where we are now. Edward knows who Jensen is, but doesn't know about me yet. He's facing major financial problems with the property deal. Their perfect family image is cracking as the kids learn what their parents did to us. Mom is desperate to keep Jensen talking because of the kidney situation. Tomorrow we move to phase 2. I'm going to accidentally run into Edward at his current business location, revealing who I really am and my role in the property deal. Jensen is going to contact the older kids directly to share more details about what happened 10 years ago. The best part, we haven't done anything illegal. We're just making sure they face the consequences of their actions, financially and socially. Edward made a bad business decision because he was greedy. Mom is facing the results of abandoning her children and then expecting them to help when she needs something. I know some people might think the sick kid isn't innocent in all this. And he is. But so were we when they threw us away like trash. Actions have consequences. Maybe if they hadn't abandoned us, we'd be one big happy family willing to help each other out. But that's not the world they created. I'll update again after tomorrow's confrontation with Edward. Based on how he reacted to Jensen, I'm expecting fireworks. Final update. Well, this is it. The finale of 10 years in the making. Honestly, I'm surprised by how many of you have been following this whole thing. Thanks for all the comments and support. Didn't expect so many people to understand where me and Jensen were coming from. After Jensen's dinner fiasco, I was ready for my turn. I decided to show up at Edward's current business location unannounced. Wore my normal clothes this time. No need to pretend anymore. When I walked in, the receptionist, who turned out to be their oldest daughter, looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Apparently, Jensen and I looked similar enough that she immediately knew who I was. She tried to stop me from going back to Edward's office, but I just walked past her. Didn't even need to ask which door was his. I could hear him yelling on the phone about the property issue. When I pushed the door open, he was mid-sentence about suing someone over the building's problems. The look on his face when he saw me. Worth every fucking second of the past 10 years. He hung up immediately and just stared at me. I smiled and asked if he remembered me. He called me the other parasite and told me to get out before he called security. I laughed because the security was just a camera system that I could see wasn't even turned on. Typical Edward. All show, no substance. I sat down across from him without being invited and put my feet up on his desk. Told him I wanted to discuss the property he just leased. His face went from angry to confused to this weird pale color when he realized I was James. He accused me of fraud. Said he'd have me arrested. I reminded him that I never lied about the property itself. All the information was accurate. He just didn't ask the right questions or get a proper inspection. Not my fault. He was too cheap and greedy to do his due diligence. Then he did something I didn't expect. He grabbed a heavy paper weight off his desk and threw it at my head. I ducked and it smashed into the wall behind me. His daughter ran in after hearing the crash and he started screaming at her to call the police. I stayed completely calm, which seemed to make him even more unhinged. I took out my phone and played the recording Jensen had made at dinner, his own voice calling us parasites, admitting they'd abandoned us, the sounds of him flipping the table. While that was playing, I pulled out some papers from my pocket, printouts of his lease agreement with all the problematic clauses highlighted. Told him that not only was he on the hook for tens of thousands in repairs, but the agreement had a non-negotiable 5-year term. He was fucked financially speaking. His daughter was just standing there looking between us. I asked her if she remembered the day they burned our stuff. She nodded, asked if she remembered laughing while they did it. She started crying, said she was just a kid doing what her dad told her to do. Edward tried to play it off. Said they left us with his brother-in-law, completely untrue, that we were dangerous, that we'd threaten the younger kids. His own daughter called him out, said she knew that wasn't true. That she'd found old emails between him and Mom where they explicitly discussed getting rid of the extra mouth to feed before moving to France. That was news to me. I hadn't known about those emails. Turns out the kids had been doing some investigating of their own since Jensen's dinner visit. Edward told her to shut up, that she was betraying her family. She shot back that he was the one who betrayed family when he threw away 2 kids like garbage. Then she walked out, slamming the door behind her. With just the 2 of us in the room, Edward changed tactics, started offering me money to tear up the lease, said we could make a deal. I laughed in his face, told him we already had a deal 10 years ago. He got to abandon us, and in return we'd make him regret it for the rest of his life. I left him sitting there and walked out. His daughter was waiting by my car. She apologized for her part in what happened, even though she'd been a kid. Said she and her siblings had been asking questions for years about their brothers who disappeared, but were always told we were troubled kids who ran away. She gave me a flash drive with those emails between Edward and Mom, plus some other documents. Said I could use them however I wanted. She was done protecting her parents' lives. That night, Jensen and I went through everything. The emails were damning, detailed discussions about how to offload us before the move. Edward calculating how much money they'd save by not having us around. Mom suggesting they leave us with her cousin Avery instead of taking us to France. Edward responding that Avery wouldn't take us because she knew what problem children we were. Then the final decision to just abandon us and let the system deal with us. The flash drive also had recent medical records for their son, who really was seriously ill, and financial records showing Edward's business was in trouble. Even before our revenge plan started, he'd made a series of bad investments and was leveraged to the max. While we were going through this, Jensen's phone kept blowing up with messages from Mom, begging him to reconsider helping with the kidney, saying her son was getting worse, offering to pay him. With what money we weren't sure. Jensen didn't respond to any of them. The next day, we decided to go nuclear. We sent copies of the emails to everyone in Edward's business circle. Not anonymously, right from our own emails with a clear explanation of who we were and what had been done to us. Included the video from the neighbors showing them burning our stuff and telling us to walk to foster care. We also forwarded everything to the rest of the extended family who'd been fed lies about us for years. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who'd been told we were troubled kids who ran away. People who never reached out to check on us because they believed we were the problem. The response was immediate. Edward's phone must have been blowing up because he called me on my real number, which his daughter must have given him, raging about how I destroyed his reputation. Several of his business partners were pulling out of deals. The bank was reviewing his loans. His investors were asking questions he couldn't answer. Meanwhile, family members were reaching out to us for the first time in a decade. Most were horrified by what they learned. Some didn't believe it until we sent them the video. A few accused us of manipulating the situation. We didn't really care either way. The truth was out there now. Mom showed up at Jensen's apartment unannounced the next day. She was a mess, crying, barely coherent. Said Edward had kicked her out after finding out she'd been talking to us behind his back. Said their son was getting worse and the doctors were talking about dialysis. Begged Jensen on her knees to help. Jensen asked her where she was when he needed help. When he was 11 years old and had no parents, when he got beat up at school for living in someone's basement, when he had to work after school at 15 to help pay rent. She had no answers, just more tears and begging. He told her he'd think about it and closed the door in her face. She kept knocking for almost an hour before finally leaving. We found out through the step-siblings that Edward's business was imploding. The property deal was the final straw for a business that was already struggling. He'd taken out a second mortgage on their house to cover the deposit on the lease. Now they were facing potential foreclosure. 3 days after our email blast, Edward's sister called me. She was livid, not at us, but at her brother. Said she'd had no idea what he'd done. Said she would have taken us in if she'd known. I didn't believe her, but whatever. She also said that Edward and Mom were separating. He was blaming Mom for everything, saying she should never have contacted us. The next bombshell came from an unexpected source. Remember our Uncle Roman, the one who reluctantly took us in? He called out of the blue, hadn't spoken to him in years, said he'd received our email and the evidence. Admitted he'd known all along that we'd been abandoned, not that we'd run away. Edward had called him the day they left for France. Told him we were his problem now. Roman had agreed to temporarily take us in, but had always resented being forced into it. That explained a lot about his attitude toward us. Still didn't excuse it, but at least it made sense now. A week after everything blew up, Jensen made his decision about the kidney. He got tested to see if he was a match. He was. He told Mom he would donate on 2 conditions. First, she had to sign a legal document admitting to child abandonment. Second, she would have to publicly acknowledge what she'd done to us on her social media accounts where she'd been playing perfect mom for years. She agreed immediately. Would have agreed to anything at that point. But here's the thing. We weren't monsters. The sick kid hadn't done anything wrong. He was innocent in all this, just like we had been. Jensen went through with the donation. Not for Mom, not for Edward, but because he didn't want another kid to suffer for his parents' choices. The recovery was tough. I took time off work to help Jensen through it. Mom tried to visit him in the hospital, but he refused to see her. She'd fulfilled her end of the deal, signed the document, made the social media post, confessing everything. Her perfect mom image was shattered. Friends she'd had for years were unfriending her. The school PTA she chaired asked her to step down. Edward never showed up at the hospital. According to the step-siblings, he'd moved out of the house and was living in a cheap apartment. His business was in bankruptcy proceedings. The property deal had been the final nail in the coffin. The last we heard, he was trying to get the lease agreement voided on the grounds that I had misrepresented myself. His case wasn't going well. The contract was solid, and he'd signed it willingly without proper inspection. Classic Edward, never taking responsibility. As for the step-siblings, the 2 older ones keep in limited contact with us. They're trying to process everything that happened, reconciling the parents they thought they had with the people who could abandon 2 children. The youngest one, the sick kid, is doing better after the transplant. Jensen gets updates on his condition from the doctors, but doesn't have direct contact with him. Mom texts occasionally, always overly grateful, always apologetic. We don't usually respond. 10 years of silence followed by a flood of words when she needed something from us. It's too little too late. Some people might think we went too far with our revenge, that we should have just refused the kidney and walked away. But Edward and Mom didn't just hurt us once. They erased us from their lives for a decade while playing happy family. They didn't just discard us. They actively decided we weren't worth keeping. And then expected help when they needed it. Maybe someday I'll feel differently. Maybe someday the anger will fade. But right now, I don't regret a single thing we did. They abandoned 2 kids and told them to walk to foster care. They burned our belongings and laughed while doing it. They left us with nothing. Now they know what that feels like. Jensen and I are closer than ever. He's recovering well and will be able to return to his medical studies next semester. I'm still at the warehouse, but looking at going back to school myself, maybe business management. We have each other's backs. Always will.